Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our third session from the Creation Care team. Today we have a presenter, Pastor Kurt Johnson, this ELC's mission to the indigenous peoples of Alaska and the threat of rising water. So happy to have our very own Pastor Kurt here today. Pastor Kurt Johnson has been a pastor only about 60 years. Only. And he has a real heart for the indigenous people and for the care of the earth. So we welcome him here today. He also, actually, while he served for over a year in Nome, Alaska. And during that time is when he visited the missions of Alaska. So with that, welcome, Pastor Kurt.
Thank you. Just a couple things to get started here. I never served the church in Shishmaref, Alaska. I visited there for several weeks back 66 years ago, if you believe that. I think a little bit of history before we see some of these pictures. How did we, as a church, get way up there just south of the Arctic Circle and have a church in this little island of Shishmaref? And it's all started in Minnesota. There was a fellow, a Presbyterian pastor, actually sent by the Presbyterian Church to come to Minnesota to straighten out the Norwegians. He was sent, first of all, to La Crescent, Minnesota, but his charge from the Presbyterian ministry was that he should start churches out here in this area, which apparently he did. As a matter of fact, it was said about Sheldon Jackson that every day he preached, he started a new church. Well, he eventually was appointed somehow by the president and must have had contacts in high places, but he was appointed by President Harrison to go to Alaska to be head of education, commissioner of education for Alaska. And he as a commissioner, he rode around in a boat called the Bear, and it was a boat who visited all the little villages up there prior to a long time before it became a state. But the Bear brought the law to the villages, also had a doctor on board, and also had Sheldon Jackson on board. Well, this boat, the Bear, stopped at all the little villages, both on the Alaskan side, but also on the Russian side. And what Sheldon Jackson found out as he visited all of these villages was that the villages on the Siberian side, the Russian side, the people lived much better than they did on the Alaskan side. And the one thing that he found that was different on the Siberian side was that they had reindeer. And they used reindeer for transportation, they used reindeer for meat, they used reindeer for clothing, for a lot of things. So he said, what we need to do is to help the natives on the Alaskan side, and by importing reindeer and teaching them how to herd reindeer, they'll live better. Now, I one of the things I want you to imagine here is what it must be like to do subsistence living. Just imagine a little bit what it would be like if you had to grow all your own food, you had to hunt for your food, you had to go do discover in the forest and wherever the roots that were good for your health. Just think about this a little bit. Now, put that into Alaska, where there is no farmland in that area up by the Arctic Circle. And what you have to do is you have to hunt and you have to fish and you have to get to be proficient at that because it's a matter of life and death. And that's what subsistence living was all about. So Sheldon Jackson said, let's import reindeer and we'll teach those natives in Alaska how to herd reindeer. Well, that worked. They brought over several loads on the Bear to Alaska, and but the natives there really didn't know what to do with these reindeer. So he said, we need to import people from the Russian side to teach them how to herd reindeer, which they did, but it did not work out very well. Mainly because there had been some conflicts between the villages on the Alaskan side and the Russian side, and it just didn't work well. So where else do you go to find people to teach somebody how to herd reindeer? You go to northern Norway, to the Sami people of that part of the country. And so that's what they did. They invited people from northern Norway and Sweden and Finland to come, a fair number of them, and they invited them to bring their families. Well, these are all Lutherans. They wanted to have a chaplain. And so they requested from the Norwegian Lutheran Church in the States to bring them or have a chaplain come. And so they recruited a fellow who had come over from Norway by the name of Tolaf Breivik. So Tolaf and his family went to Alaska and to be a kind of a chaplain for the Sami people who were there, but he became interested in the native people who were there, and so he began to make contact with the native people, and eventually started the church for the native people as well as for those Sami people who were there from northern Norway. And so that's how we got there to this. Well, Shishmaref wasn't the first place, but it was one of the villages. Shishmaref is an island, and I have a little brief history of Shishmaref here if you'd like to have that. There are several copies and that sort of thing. And so from that time on, there were Lutheran little conclaves in a number of small villages kind of north of the Seward Peninsula, north of Nome, and along the coastline there. Now, what has happened as the years have passed and we began to have climate change, it has begun to threaten not only Shishmaref, but also some of the other small villages along the coastal sea. And several things have happened, actually. As the sea ice has melted, and the waters have risen, and the storms have increased. This island of Shishmaref is being threatened. As a matter of fact, there's some indication that within the next 20 years, possibly, the island itself will be eroded away. I have a map here that shows what the anticipated destruction of the island will be like in a few years. What's happening are a number of things. As I indicated, the sea ice is melting. The storms are getting worse. The erosion is greater. The fish species are changing. They do a regular test for the fish in the area and the various varieties of fish. But another thing that they're finding is that the size of the fish are getting smaller. So again, if you can imagine, your subsistence living, obviously Shishmaref has changed a well of a lot since I was there, but they still are very dependent upon the sea life for both hunting and fishing, and also whatever they can scrounge along the shorelines. And recently, there have been a couple of shows on public television that emphasize what's going on. There was one recently that showed a lake where there were bubbles coming up. And they wondered, what's going on here? And they found out that this was a gas coming from the permafrost that's melting, and actually lit a fire there on the lake of the gas, the methane that's coming up. And they don't know how many places there are like this. This area was discovered just outside of the village of Kotzebue, but they're not sure how many places there are where this methane is coming up because of the melting of the permafrost that's taking place. One of the other things that they've found is that as erosion has taken place, is that they've found that there was life here a long time ago of mammoths, these huge animals. And again, one of the discoveries of something that's going on that's changing as a result of the climate. So what I thought today is we'll just run through some of these pictures to put a human face on climate change. I don't think we recognize, the severity of this thing that's going on right now in our country. And so we drove to Alaska when there was 1,500 miles of gravel road from Dawson Creek in British Columbia. And this is Dawson Creek in British Columbia. We'll see if we can get this started. Help. I'm technologically handicapped. Are we going? Okay, this is just along the highway. It's a beautiful drive. It's all blacktop now. So this is during the construction days. This is the island of Shishmaref as it was, like I say, about 66 years ago in the post office. This fellow is working on a skin boat called an umiak. They had to find ice for drinking water. Now they have a water system. These are some of the children. This is Helen Frost, who was a missionary there at Shishmaref for years. And this young guy here on the left. If this is something about that. Okay, this is another little village, Teller, just south of the Arctic Circle. Again, threatened now by the rising sea. Breivik Mission, which is right across the bay from Teller, another place where we have a church. At Breivik Mission, there's a cemetery where about 50 people were buried at one time during the flu epidemic in the 1916. At the time we were there, the main means of transportation was by dog team. It was before snowmobiles had been well, I think they were around, but they certainly weren't prevalent in Alaska. So they depended upon their dogs for transportation and also for getting them where they wanted to go. Dog teams knew their way home. Snow machines don't. This is the city of Nome, about 3,000 to 4,000 people. This was our church there. I was sent there as an intern, and this was our congregation. This was our Sunday school. Again, what I want you to take a look at are the faces. These are people. These are real people who are being hurt right now by climate change. This is an interesting picture. I'm sorry, we missed it. That was David Wallach, and we had services. Eventually, we had two services on Sundays. We used an interpreter for the sermon, and the other was all in English. It's a job to have a funeral and have to dig into permafrost. This was the parsonage there. A couple of the people who were missionaries there at that time. This was going home after church. This is kind of an interesting picture. This boat in the forefront is called an umiak, and they're a skin boat. And Nome is not a deep water port, and so the ships that brought in supplies had to anchor out a ways and bring in the supplies, many of them in umiaks like this. Oh, this is a fun story. David Wallach, whom you saw in one of the pictures, was one of the leaders in the church, and he had a dog team, which was a very good dog team. And this was before the Iditarod, and they decided on Palm Sunday that they were going to have dog team races. And so David raced his team, and he won the race. So he made, I think, about $75. That was a big prize at that time. Anyway, the next Sunday was Easter Sunday, And they decided this was such a great thing, they'd have dog team races on Easter Sunday. Well, David said, Easter Sunday is too important to me as a Christian. I'm not racing my team. His brother wasn't quite as faithful, and his brother said, I would like to race the team. So David said, sure, take the team and you race. Dogs wouldn't run for him. He came in last. Okay. Are we moving here? There you go. Okay, sorry. This is taken on the shortest day of the year. This was my wife, Ruth, and our son, Carl, who was born there. And this was our dog, Kobuk, we bought. There was a little snow. We didn't actually get a lot of snow, but we had a lot of wind. So it blew the snow up into huge drifts. This is an interesting story. This young man on the right here, Clifford Olana was his name. And Ruth had Clifford in her Sunday school class. And she said to me one day, if I were to adopt somebody, I'd like to adopt Clifford. Well, we had just had a child, and so that wasn't part of the picture. Well, one day his mother came, and Frida Olana, and she came, and one of the things you had to learn in Alaska with the native people was to be quiet and listen. They did not necessarily speak easily as we do. So she sat down and she said, we'd like to give you something. And I said, well, that's interesting. What is that? She said, we'd like to give you our son. Yes, she said, we want to have him do church work. We wanted him to be a missionary. And we think that you could help him be that. Well, I mean, we had just had a child. I had another year of seminary. That it just wasn't possible. So what I finally said to her is that, it's a wonderful thing. And what we would like you to do is keep your son here and grow up among your people. And when it's time for further education, we'll help with that. Well, as it turned out, years later, I inquired as to what had happened to Clifford, and we visited Nome, and we stopped off in Anchorage, and there was a gathering of the pastors there, and I asked about Clifford, and they said, well, Clifford just died. Well, what happened? Well, he was mentally ill, and he committed suicide. So that was a very sad story, but this is an Umayak. They're very seaworthy boats. Drying salmon. Fishing is important up there. You have to feed the dogs, but also feed yourself. A walrus, this is a walrus skin. This is an interesting story too. This woman is Billy Atateak. Billy was fishing tomcod, and she was elderly when I was there. She wasn't 90 like I am now, but she was in her 70s, I'm sure. and she had lines in her cheek. And what those were for, and they were made by putting sinew on a needle and then running that sinew through a flame, and it would darken, and you run it right under your skin, and it would make a line. And the lines identified the villages that the people came from. And I told you that there was conflict between the Russians and on the Alaskan side, and sometimes they actually couldn't communicate with each other because the dialects were different. But the identification that the women had, they knew where they came from. So when they captured them and brought them back, they know the village that they needed to go to. This is Billy Atatak. This fellow had been hunting seal. He has a sealskin poke that he has his gun in and back. He's going home. And this woman is cleaning a seal. Actually, this is Frida Olano, was her son. And this time of the year, they stretch the sealskin and put it out to bleach out, so they make things with them. But they like the nice white sealskin. This is simply a dance, a celebration, the 4th of July up there. They have dances, blanket toss. Can you believe it? All these pictures are 66 years old. They were taken on a little small camera. This is Andrew Tinguk, and he's drilling. And then I'll show you a bracelet that he made after a little bit. This is gold dredge. Most of the dredging now is going on actually in the sea, in the Bering Sea. Okay, I think that's the end. I just brought along a few things. These were my mucklucks that I used there. The bottoms are ugruk or sea lion, and they're shaped by women chewing the, yeah. Although the woman who actually made these, Bessie Moses, had learned how to use a plier to do it rather than chewing. Use the shape. Anyway, and this is a bone carving that actually came from Shishmaref, and it's a fairly recent bone carving. I have a picture of the fellow who did this, and these are some dolls. Oftentimes when we were there, it was before Alaska was a state. It was before they discovered oil in the North Slope, and so it was tough. And it was the women would make dolls and sell them, and several times women would come by our little parsonage there and want to sell a doll, and these are a couple of dolls that they made and came by. And this, I tell you, you saw this fellow Andrew Tinguk, who was working with the ivory, and this is a bracelet that Andrew made. And you're very much welcome to come up and take a look at this stuff. And I was telling you that one of the things they're discovering recently is these huge animals that live there, there's dinosaurs at one time. And this is mammoth ivory This is from one of the old dinosaurs that was uncovered when we were there. Anyway, and for the women, this is a cookbook it was put together by the kids from the school in Shishmaref when we were there. And if you want to know what's going on recently, I have some copies of the Gnome Nugget. These are the last 3 copies. They'll tell you about the climate. They'll tell you about fish conditions and all that sort of thing. So if you'd like a copy, Pastor Inger, I'll leave them with her and she can give you a copy. Anyway, do you have some questions at this point? Yeah.
Did you live in that parsonage?
Yeah, we did change it a little bit.
Really?
But what it was, there were actually 2 shacks that were put together by what called sourdoughs, guys who were looking for gold. And then a third little room was built on the back of it. And the insulation in the wall was dirty underwear.
Ruth must have done all the shoveling.
Yeah, right. No, we painted it and it fixed it up. It was decent. But it's interesting, we were told before we went up there that this was one of the nicer houses in town. Now, it's interesting. Much of the town was on permafrost. And it's very difficult to build on permafrost. And so a lot of the houses were built simply on sleds or on, so they could be pulled around. And so it was not uncommon for us to wake up in the morning and see a house out in front of us being transported from one place to another. But after we left, they decided to build a church in Nome. And as a matter of fact, the architect for that church was Norm Madsen, who were from our congregation here. And Norm was a good friend of Norval Hagelin, who was the pastor up there. And Norval contacted Norm about building the church. And this is a picture of the dedication of the church. It was not the best design for that place, but it was good. And but the question was, how do you build a church, in permafrost and have it be stable? Before I left there, I contacted one of the engineers of the mining company, and I said, if you were building, how would you build? How would you do this? And he said, I would build on pilings. And what I would do is drill down through the permafrost, try to get down to bedrock, and then put down your piling with a big end down, and then put an oil gravel mixture around the pilings so that when the permafrost moves, when it melts, it'll slide on the piling. And that's what they did. And the church has been there now for 65 years about, so still standing. Other questions? Yes. I can't hear you, June.
Are we going to show the video now? We're going to show the video now, right?
It's up to you if you want to show that.
Yeah. We still have time. It's only 5 minutes.
Sure.
And then we'll still have time for questions.
Did they sell a lot of lutefisk there?
No. You ate those things before they got rotten.
While he's setting that up, I want to say in the summer of '04, I worked at Sheldon Jackson College in Sitka, Alaska. And it no longer exists. The college was a Presbyterian college. It no longer exists. And Sitka had the first Lutheran church on the west coast of North America. It was built by the Russians for their Finnish carpenters. So it's the oldest church on the Lutheran church on the west coast of North America. Not Shishmaref, but Sitka. '04, well, when the church was built, back when it was Russian territory, before it
Could you
was
stay
owned by.
calm instead of being greedy and taking the land away? For thousands of years, the Nukgiak people of Shishmaref, Alaska have lived at the center of animal migration routes along the Bering Strait. Their livelihoods and culture characterized by a profound interdependence between the land and sea and the animals and people. However, as rising temperatures in the Arctic region cause polar ice melting and thinning, the traditional way of life of the Shishmaref people may soon vanish with the rising tide. The high levels of greenhouse gases released by humans have trapped heat in the planet's lower atmosphere, causing global temperatures to rise. In Arctic regions, this has created a positive feedback loop that is contributing to even greater warming than in other parts of the world. The loop is called the albedo effect and works as follows. As global temperatures rise due to human activity, Arctic sea ice melts. When this reflective ice disappears, darker ocean water absorbs more heat, causing a greater increase in temperature and further ice melt. According to the National Academy of Sciences, the Arctic has warmed almost 2 degrees Celsius since the 1970s. While this change may seem insignificant, the temperature rise has led to a significant diminishing of the polar ice caps, decreasing summer sea ice coverage by nearly 40%. For the residents of Shishmaref, this means their community is no longer the center of the bearded seal population migration route that their diet and culture so heavily depend upon.
We wasn't here to help people survive. The only reason we're here is because we subsist off the ocean and off the land. And that's our primary reason why Shishmaref is located here. We live to be close to the ocean.
Life in Shishmaref revolves around this relationship with the natural world, and the importance of ice as a connection between two landscapes is at the center. For example, the Shishmaref people have 62 words just to describe the dynamics of sea ice. Bearded seals, and to some extent spotted seals, are the region's most valued socioeconomic resource, but according to community elders, it is no longer safe to hunt on the thinning ice, and the unstable conditions have required the use of expensive boats. In past hunting seasons, the hunt has not even occurred, disrupting the traditional subsistence hunting lifestyle that is so ingrained in the Shishmaref culture. Local hunters have not only observed the changing distribution and routes of the bearded seal population, but also that the seals have had thinner blubber in recent years. This decline in the size and general health of the population can be attributed to rising ocean temperatures that cause toxic algal blooms. Not only does this impact the seal population, it eliminates a food source for native birds, impacting the biodiversity of the region, making land and sea less resilient and destroying an important source of food and culture for the Shishmaref people. The impact on hunting and biodiversity, combined with increases in flooding and wind that can be attributed to climate change, has made life in Shishmaref difficult, and the future of the people unclear. Since 2001, the already small island has lost an average of nearly 23 feet of shoreline per year, and homes and buildings have been destroyed due to flooding. In the past, communal mobility in response to seasonal flooding was part of Shishmaref's lifestyle, but when colonization prompted sedentarization, the once highly resilient and mobile population was forced to stay in one spot. Now, there isn't much left of Shishmaref to escape to. As a result, the people of Shishmaref have decided that leaving the island that has been their home for generations is the only option. But such a big endeavor would require upwards of $180 million, and little assistance has been given by the state or federal government. Moreover, the relocation process would prove difficult to the preservation of Shishmaref culture, as migration outside traditional subsistence land would mean the destruction of cultural integrity. Shishmaref is not unique. 186 other Alaskan Native villages are currently facing the effects of climate change, and at least 12 are searching for relocation options. Climate change is also forcing other communities around the world to relocate. Several droughts has forced hundreds of people to migrate through the Himalayas in Central Asia, as well as in the Senegal River Valley. Similar to Shishmaref, over 400 coastal and island communities in the United States are facing relocation. While everyone is affected by climate change, communities with fewer resources are currently facing its harshest effects. As we go forward, it is essential that we provide support for the communities that are suffering as we work to counteract the damage we have done. To support climate refugees around the world, please donate to the Environmental Justice Foundation's Climate Refugee Protection Campaign that works to give vulnerable communities throughout the world a voice and provide protection against extreme weather events and climate change that are already displacing an estimated 41 people each minute, and the International Arctic Research Center, which brings together scientists and local Alaskan communities for collaborative research projects. Thank you.
They have selected a couple of sites on the mainland for the village to move. There are about 500 people who live actually on the island. The problem is that there's no money available for infrastructure, for moving, and if you've lived in this place all your life, you don't just get up and move, especially if you're subsistence living. Now, it's not totally subsistence living anymore, but it's still a major part of the way of life. And so you don't move away where you've been hunting and fishing and doing all of these things, and you've fed your family. So anyway, anything else? We got 2 minutes.
Did the reindeer make it? Did the reindeer make it?
Yes, the reindeer made it. As a matter of fact, that's kind of an interesting story. Not only did they bring reindeer from Russia, but they brought reindeer from northern Norway, shipped them all the way across the country. Had to feed them along the way, the whole thing. But yeah, there are still herds of reindeer. As a matter of fact, one of those pictures that I showed there were of reindeer hides. Yeah, they made it. They're still living. Okay. You're certainly welcome to come up and take a look at some of this stuff.
Great. And also, some of you have already signed. There are letters at the back. It's a lot of you want to know, how can I take action? And so the letter is about legislative action addressing rising waters, and thank you so much for giving such a personal side to how climate change is affecting real people. Thank you, Pastor Kurt.